For more on President Prabowo's first 100 days in office and what challenges he faces ahead, let's speak now with Vedi Hadiz, a professor of Asian Studies and Redmond Berry Distinguished Professor at the Asia Institute at University of Melbourne. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor Hadiz. So over 80% approval rating is certainly impressive, but how would you grade Mr. Prabowo's performance during his first 100 days in office and why?
I think I'd be less benevolent than the majority of my countrymen. I think that 80% has been achieved by a couple of important strategies. One is the consolidation of power, which has meant including as many of Indonesia's political parties as possible in his cabinet and divvying out cabinet seats and other key government positions to them. And therefore, you get a situation where it seems that, political stability has been achieved. And that is something that the public would appreciate. But this has been at the price of inflating the size of his cabinet and also playing a form of patronage politics. The second way he's done this is by a very, very successful public relations campaign. Of course, in Indonesia, this includes armies of buzzers and so on. But the material that they use is, of course, what you mentioned as his populist policies. Now, they look good on paper, but also, as you mentioned, there are many problems to their implementation because the food distribution project, for example, requires a massive coordination of resources, institutions, and agencies across thousands of islands, and will have a huge price tag on the national budget. And already we're seeing some problems in its implementation. We'll see whether that continues, but clearly this has created a lot of goodwill towards him. And I think thirdly, he has pursued corruption cases, albeit selectively, I think in terms of mainly trying to undermine the position of potential political adversaries, but again, as part of his political consolidation. But altogether, this creates the image of political stability and strong leadership that the people like.
Professor Hadiz, I want to go back to the point you were making earlier about Indonesia's fiscal position. Some economists concerned about Prabowo's heavy spending plans. Are you as concerned? I mean, Prabowo and his team, are very quick to say, if you look at the meal plan, it's just going to cost over 4 billion this year, which is a mere fraction of Indonesia's, $1.4 trillion economy. What's your position on Indonesia's fiscal position?
I think that I concur with many analysts that have said that he's made a lot of promises, the cost of which may not have been particularly well planned. And the reason he's been able to do that, or thinks that he can get away with doing that, is that he is expecting support for government policies from the private sector, which means, frankly, a lot more political patronage, and secondly, from foreign sources, in particular China. Now, his plans for 8% economic growth in Indonesia, for most people, sounds like a pipe dream, and I'm one of those people. It would anything near anything approximating that number would require huge amounts of investment, especially foreign investment, and the main source would be China. And secondly, it would require basically getting rid of all environmental and social, economic sustainability policies to give a free rein to destruction of Indonesia's natural resources.
And Professor Hadiz, in the international front, Prabowo has positioned Indonesia as a key player in organizations like BRICS. But some experts argue that his foreign policy focused on global alliances has sort of sidelined ASEAN relations. How do you assess Prabowo's foreign policy approach so far?
Well, two things. One is that he's a huge man with huge ambitions, and ASEAN may be just too small a stage for him. And secondly, I think he's read that to support his plans, there are really no real sources of support that can be gained through the ASEAN relationships. He has to play on the bigger stage.
Right.
And to project Indonesia and himself onto the biggest stage, and hence BRICS. And what is BRICS? BRICS, of course, is being put forward as an expression of Indonesia's free and active foreign policy. But really, it is an avenue through which he will try to develop closer relations, in particular with China, which is the engine of BRICS, and therefore try to guarantee sources of funding and investment from China to the greatest extent possible. But of course, he's also got to make sure that he doesn't rile up the Americans. So he's got to play a sort of very delicate balancing act there.
Right.
It's important for him to be still seen as an ally of America because he still wants to buy arms from America. One of his pillars is to strengthen Indonesia's armed forces.
I want to pick up on this point in particular, Professor, because the Trump administration has been in office for about a week or so. Marco Rubio is the Secretary of State. Any idea what how the U.S. is going to react to these moves by Prabowo to move from non-alignment to multi-alignment in order to have a greater say in global affairs and basically be friends to everyone, enemies or enemy to none?
First of all, I would be surprised if Trump actually knew where Indonesia was. But apart from that, I think that, well, I mean, my point there is that Indonesia is well down on his priority list. He has other immediate fish to fry. And I think that it will be a while before he develops a policy in relation to Indonesia. What he would want in relation to Indonesia clearly is access to Indonesian markets and to make sure that American companies have access, continued access to Indonesia's natural resources, its mining riches, etc. Even though the Chinese are getting more and more into it, especially within the program of downstreaming that Prabowo and his predecessor Jokowi have embarked upon, because the West really has not been particularly interested in supporting this policy, and the Chinese have.
Indeed, Professor, and this before we let you go, despite his early popularity, of course, Prabowo's presidency is not without challenges. But what do you think will be the most critical test for his leadership over the next 12 months? And how well prepared do you think his administration is to handle it?
Well, I think that what we're experiencing now is what I would call his populist phase. And the reason for that phase is to make sure that he develops a popular base independent or relatively independent from that of his predecessor Jokowi, who was responsible for him winning the presidency. Now, that popular base will enable him to distance himself and also to make sure that his own patron-client networks and so on get into the key parts of the economy, and that would actually eventually bring him in conflict with the people around Jokowi. This is already happening, by the way. He's already approaching Megawati Soekarno Putri, who is now Jokowi's arch enemy. So keeping that idea of social political stability will be a bit of a problem, I think, in future as the elites fight over the economic pie, and also I think that after the populist phase, he will get on to the business of making sure that his business alliances and so on get into the mining and into the property development and so on, and that will actually raise questions about his populist credentials.
Okay, Professor, understood. We do have to leave it there. We thank you so much for appearing on our show this morning. Professor Vedi Hadiz is from the Asia Institute at the University of Melbourne.